Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Past Lives, starring Greta Lee, T.U., and John Magaro, directed by Celine Song. Now, I must say now, I've never seen this movie, but I have heard of it, but I've just never seen it in general. So this will be my first two viewings of this movie, so let's just get straight into this. We open with Nora, played by Greta Lee, and Hae Sung, played by T.U., being narrated about who they are as we move back to 24 years earlier as Hae Sung and Nora, or as her original name was, Na Young, in Seoul, Korea, as we see them as kids while Na Young is depressed because Hae Sung got first place at school while Na Young is always first place in school. And Na Young's sister C is named Michelle, who we never see too much of again after this scene. When they move to America, while Na Young is named Nora because she doesn't like any other American names except for Michelle. As Nora, as a little girl, wants to marry Hae Sung as she has a crush on him because he's manly, but that's just a little girl talking, let's say. And I've been through phases like that once in my lifetime, and I like how true this rang to me, as that could happen to anybody. And I really like the two main characters as they are as kids, have chemistry, and when they're adults, I'll get to that later in the film. Hae Sung is upset as he doesn't talk to Na Young because she's moving to America, and the only thing they say to each other is when they apart is bye-bye. And doesn't say I'll miss you like I was hoping for on my first viewing. But damn, it bothered me when he doesn't say it. As when they become adults later in the film, he talks about how upset he was as Nora and Michelle get to America while with their parents, and 12 years pass as Hae Sung was in the Korean military while Nora moves to New York, and the shots are well done in this, as this movie is very well made. Nora talks about her past while talking to her mother, as we learn she leaked in her pants all the time as she cried a lot growing up, which is a piece of dialogue said a little later in the movie. And she goes on Facebook and sees her father's films post because he's a film director, and she learns Hae Sung is looking for her to get in touch with her as she's a childhood friend after all these years, and she messages him on Facebook about if he remembers her, because remember, she changed her name when she went to America, and the actors are doing a pretty good job at telling me who they are as kids versus adults. While Hae Sung is still living with his parents in Korea, and I like these characters as we know them quite well. They Skype one another, and Hae Sung prefers to call Nora Na Young, as it was her original name from when she was born, and the two actors have such good chemistry from kids to adults, as this is working for me. And I did like the cinematography in both New York and Korea, as it was tremendous to watch. They talked for a long time on Skype, and both of them seem very happy to see each other again. And Hae Sung asks because at one point, Nora says she was leaving Korea to win a Nobel Prize, but she instead thinks about the Pulitzer, which is something that has to do with novels, I think, as she's trying to be a writer. And she recommends a movie to him called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is funny because, to me, in a good way, because after watching that movie recently, because I did solely recommend people see that movie, and he does watch it while sometimes going to school in Korea, and the romance is pretty sweet in my opinion, for just them being friends. Nora asks Hae Sung to go to New York to see her, and he asks her why, and she asks him to stop talking to her for now, as he is depressed, as is she, about it. And they go their separate ways, and she goes to a nice quiet place with chickens, with a garden, and tours around the place, while in Korea, Hae Sung almost writes an email to Nora saying he's coming to visit Japan. Well, maybe not Japan, but as we move on to the next day, where Nora meets Arthur, played by John Magaro, who's an actor I've reviewed a couple of times with Captain Phillips and The Finest Hours, and I've seen him in other movies like Overlord and Unbroken, but I don't remember him in any of those movies I mentioned. And Nora talks about a Korean word called inyeon, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which is a family word about marriage, and we move on 12 years later and Nora and Arthur are married to each other, living in New York together. And I didn't mind them as a couple, while Arthur does seem nice as he's a writer and signed some books he wrote at one point during these 12 years. While Hae Sung's life seems kind of depressing, as this movie is a tearjerker for damn sure. Hae Sung visits New York for a vacation as he's there while severe thunderstorms hit New York while he's there at the time. And I've been to New York before, and not only does it rain there, but it also snows there. And the winter time, I'll say. I don't know about every day, but as he tours around on his own, and these scenes are pretty engaging. On a sunny day, Hae Sung is approached by Nora. When they see each other again, they hug and go whoa, as it's been so long since they last saw each other, and they spend time together in New York and walk under the bridge and talk about how complicated his ex-girlfriend is. And the dialogue is written very well as she takes a couple of pictures of Hae Sung and go through the carnival. And so far, I'm liking this movie as it's a good romance movie, but I didn't love the movie because it's a tearjerker. The catching up between Hae Sung and Nora continues as Hae Sung explains how upset he was in the beginning of the movie and how she kept showing up in his mind while he was in the military, and asks what if it happened a certain way. And nighttime comes and Nora comes home to Arthur while he was watching the TV. As she says Hae Sung came to see her while Hae Sung goes back to the hotel. And this is when the movie's, like I said, becoming a tearjerker, but I didn't cry, I'll say that much, but it is sad. Where Arthur asks Nora, does she love him? And she says he's a physical man, and it was intense, and this is becoming a sad romance movie, but a good one. Whereas in Star Wars Attack of the Clones, George Lucas writes a silly romance, like you could laugh at how bad the dialogue in that was. But here, but you know what? That movie was bad enough as it was anyways. But here, I feel bad about how they'll not get together at the end of the movie. Spoiler alert. Nora and Arthur go to bed together while they talk about what life could have been like with Hae Sung married to Nora. And it goes kind of dramatic for them, and Arthur brings up how Nora talks Korean in her sleep, and that felt like a funny piece of dialogue. And at the end of the day, I believe Nora picked the right choice to marry Arthur, as Hae Sung seems to more have a depressing life. Nora goes on to the boat where Hae Sung goes bye-bye, and he goes, what award? And he asks what award she would want to win, and she says a Tony Award, which is something that has to do with Broadway, as she goes on the boat with him and hang out and take photos together. And nighttime comes, and she takes Hae Sung to her place with Arthur, and Arthur meets Hae Sung for the first time. And Hae Sung comments his Korean is good, and he wants to get pasta, and I get the impression he's never tried it before. And we get the same area as the start of the movie, where they sit at the bar, and they get to know each other as Hae Sung and Nora say how much they miss each other in Korean. And I do like how each actor has chemistry in each other, and not in a weird way, I'll say. Nora says to Hae Sung that Na Young he knew as a kid doesn't exist anymore, and he realizes that while talking in Korean. And Arthur pays the bill while Nora has gone to the restroom, and Hae Sung says to Arthur he'll speak English for the rest of the night if he can. And Arthur understands that they haven't seen each other in a very long time, and when they get back to their place, Hae Sung suggests to Arthur to come see him in Korea sometime, and Nora takes Hae Sung to his Uber. And as they wait, they stare at each other like they'll never see each other again, which is a sad way to go, as they hug goodbye and say their goodbyes, as Arthur comforts Nora as she cries, and they get back in their place together. And Hae Sung is on his way back to Seoul, Korea, and this climax was depressing. While I didn't cry, but it was a very sad climax for damn sure. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 7.7 out of 10. I do like the characters, as the actors do a pretty good job at telling the audience who they are as kids versus adults, as these two characters have such good chemistry from kids to adults, as this movie is very well made and shot very well, as this is a concept work for me. The cinematography in both Korea and New York is tremendous to watch, as the romance was pretty sweet in my opinion, unlike the way George Lucas wrote it in Star Wars Attack of the Clones, where the dialogue was dead in the water as was the romance in my opinion, as this is told better than that. And I don't think this will win the Best Picture Oscar, but it is a good romance movie, as this is a tearjerker for people, and I'm not sensitive towards it, as it was a very sad movie for sure, and I would have loved the movie if it weren't for that. But I did like the movie, as this is a recommendation, and you should see it, but if you do, be prepared for how sad it is. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this whole Oscar season, and until we get to next year, and the Oscar goes to...